In 1991, two hikers in the Alps found a frozen body near the Austrian-Italian border. They assumed it was a modern accident. It wasn't. The man had been lying there for 5,300 years. Scientists eventually named him Ötzi. And when they spent years running every test available on his remains, they found arthritis, hardened arteries, intestinal parasites, a torn rotator cuff that had partially healed, and Lyme disease. The man was falling apart. But tucked into his belt, threaded onto a leather cord, were two small pieces of birch fungus. That fungus has documented antibiotic properties. Ötzi didn't know that, but at some point, someone in his world had noticed it helped, and so he carried it. A sick man, 5,300 years ago, already managing his own health. The question is, how far back does that actually go? Much further than most people assume. For most of the last century, the standard image of prehistoric illness was simple. People got sick, didn't understand why, and died. Helpless, passive. But the more carefully archaeologists looked, the more that image collapsed entirely. There is a Neanderthal burial site in Iraq called Shanidar Cave. Inside, researchers found the skeleton of a man who had lived with a withered arm, a missing eye, severe arthritis, and a healed skull fracture. He was middle-aged when he died, which means, given his injuries, he had been kept alive for years by someone else. Someone fed him, someone protected him. Someone decided he mattered enough to keep alive, and Neanderthals are not even our species. They're a cousin we barely give credit to. But there they were, tens of thousands of years ago, already refusing to abandon the sick. That refusal, the decision not to leave someone, turns out to be one of the oldest things about us. But caring for someone and understanding what was wrong with them are entirely different things. And for most of human prehistory, the understanding simply wasn't there. When a body turned against itself with no visible wound and no obvious cause, early humans reached for the only explanation that made sense. Something had entered from outside, a spirit, a punishment, an invisible force that needed to be driven out. Here's the part that sounds strange until you sit with it. They weren't entirely wrong. The idea that illness comes from something foreign invading the body and disrupting it from within. That is, more or less, what a bacterial infection actually is. They had no germ theory, no microscope, but the basic intuition was pointing at something real. They just named it wrong. So healing, for most of human history, became the attempt to remove whatever had gotten in. In ancient Mesopotamia, two types of healers existed side by side. One performed rituals, prayers, incantations, ceremonies. The other prescribed physical treatments, plant medicines, specific foods, instructions for what to avoid. Both were taken equally seriously. And here's what's remarkable. Modern pharmacologists have gone back and tested the plant remedies written on those ancient clay tablets. A significant portion of them have measurable biological effects. The healers writing those prescriptions had no idea why the plants worked, but across enough generations, with enough observation, they had learned that they did. That same pattern shows up everywhere. Ancient Chinese healers mapped pressure points across the human body and built an entire system around manipulating them. In India, Ayurvedic practitioners identified dietary interventions so precise that modern research is still catching up. And in the Amazon, indigenous healers combined two specific plants whose effects only appear when taken together. Nobody had laboratories. Nobody had clinical trials. They had time, attention, and the discipline to pass what they learned to the next generation. But there's a category of early medicine that science spent a long time dismissing, and is now quietly walking that back. When there were no pills and no hospitals, healing happened in community. People surrounded the sick. They stayed through the night. They sang, prayed, touched, performed rituals, refused to let suffering happen alone. For decades, scientists categorized all of this as superstition. Comforting, perhaps, medically meaningless, but the research shifted. Chronic stress measurably weakens immune response. Social isolation slows physical recovery. The belief that someone is actively fighting for your survival creates real, documented changes inside the body. Ancient healers had found something true. They just explained it in the language they had. Gods, spirits, sacred smoke. The explanation was wrong. The effect was real. Which brings us back to Ötzi. Frozen in the Alps, sick with multiple conditions. No doctor, no pharmacy, no diagnosis. Just a man who reached for the closest thing he had, a piece of fungus someone before him had found useful. He didn't understand the mechanism. He just knew it helped, because someone had taught him it helped, because someone had taught that person before them. That is the entire history of early medicine in a single image. Not ignorance, not helplessness, something closer to stubbornness, a refusal to face suffering without reaching for something. The tools were often wrong. The instinct was exactly right. And that instinct, the one that says we do not simply watch each other suffer without trying, is older than any civilization we have a name for. It might be the most human thing we've ever done.